Well, the Lear books you can leave on the high stool, and on the footstool are the books for Merchant of Venice next fall, so if you want to read ahead. Yeah. Well, last time I said that we had a lot of things hanging. When I worked over the notes that I had for things pending, I found out that I really didn't have so many because I had tucked them in with other things. And yet others of the things that were dangling in the air seemed to be handled better at another time. And still others seemed like they weren't important at all to put much effort into. So we have very few things left over, and a minor theme and a major theme to work through. And we're going to do that all tonight. I don't think it's going to be super long, but we will be finished, and I can get to the garden, and we'll be all set to go on. Carl Jung has a very lovely book on the study of psychological types. And in that book, he talks about earlier forms of typology. And one of those is William James' typology. And he sees that as a pre-statement to his own typology. The way Jung looks at things, there are two basic tendencies relative to an object, and if a person gets stuck more in one of those tendencies than the other, they are either an introvert or an extrovert. In William James' study, he has types that somewhat correspond, but he calls them meek-minded or tender-minded and tough-minded. Now, the William James typology isn't very sophisticated, and it isn't as elaborate as Jung's is. But it is very apt at some times, and it applies extremely well. And to some of the characters in this play, it especially works well. We've noted that there are some very tough-minded characters in the play. For example, Edmund is extremely tough, and he's outward until his death. And so is Cornwall. And so are the two sisters, even though one of them gives up and commits suicide. In this play, most of the meek-minded characters grow, but the tough-minded ones do not. They are villains more than they suffer. The meek obviously include Gloucester and Edgar and the fool and even Lear. Lear bellows a lot, but his bark is much worse than his bite is. When he has to kill the man who's hanging his daughter, when he speaks about that, he's even apologetic about having to kill someone. Now, we could get the wrong idea from all of this. And we could think then that tough-minded people are always evil and that meek-minded individuals are always good. We could get that idea from this play. In fact, there are even psychologists that think that way. There was just an article in the papers just a few weeks ago where there was a study that suggested that tough-minded athletes are more prone to being criminals. I'm not sure that I really believe that tough-minded people are necessarily criminal. However, if they do have tendencies, they're going to be a little bit more prone to act on them, and when they do act, their actions will be overt. Meek-minded people can also be criminal, but when they are so they stew over it a long time, and in the stewing over it, when they finally decide to do something, they're sneaky about it. But they're just as criminal as tough-minded people. Now we could speculate about explanations why Shakespeare has the meek-minded be good and why they grow. And we'll do a bit of that. There are hints that back up various different kinds of speculations, but they're controversial. At least controversial if you look into psychology and spiritual studies. One example is when we, in the past, looked at how the good guys feigned craziness, or why they disguised themselves so much. We used that to discuss philosophies of relating to the external world. The two poles being, like St. Paul saying, avoid even the appearance of evil. And Madame Blavatsky saying, hide your virtues and let your good parts go to the front. And let your faults go to the front. These philosophies relate to how we deal with something that happens in spirituality. When once we commit ourselves to growing spiritually and turn our energies inward to connect with the Spirit, what happens is something like a centrifugal force. In the desire body, things that are normally subconscious are flushed to the surface so we can work on them. Spiritual students are meant to have lives that are hellish compared to other people because that's the best way we can grow, the swiftest way that we can grow and be used. So mysticism in this sense is introversive. It turns inward, and one of the consequences of that is throwing things out, and that explains some of the reasons for the disguises. Now that may work to describe the evil, but at least according to the desire world, or it may work to describe the functioning of those who disguise themselves or feign craziness or something like that. But it doesn't describe the tough-minded ones, the ones who are openly and unabashedly cruel and evil, plucking out Gloucester's eyes and stomping on them. That's, there's nothing hidden there. This is not the only play. There are one or two others where the evil beings are not sneaky, but they're outright open about it. Now you could just say something really simple, that the reason that the evil people are like this is because they're in the driver's seat. And everybody that's in the conspiracy knows everybody else that's in the conspiracy, so there's no reason to hide anything. But that brings us to something about, it's a major topic for our time. And it's something that we, as people who are trying to grow spiritually, need to think about. Because it's coming to us, and it's coming to humanity in general. There are spiritual organizations that have been working on it for as much as 14 or 15 centuries. The Manichaeans are specialists in this problem. So, let's look at society as it changes a little bit year by year. One of the best examples is the subject of privacy. Each year, as technology advances, more and more can be known about what was previously private information. Our emails can be monitored. Our phone messages can be monitored. We have laws against it, but those laws get subverted. Many of our personal records can be examined. Our purchases on our credit card, anybody can get a hold of that information if they're clever with a computer. And it goes so far now that people are taking little tiny mini chips and they're embedding them in their kids so that they can pinpoint where their kids are. They're embedding them in their pets so that they can find exactly where their pets are. And there are things that are even more devious than this. There are software people who launch agents. And an agent is a self-contained program made with artificial intelligence, and it gets launched into what is called cyberspace. And they're programmed in such a way that they can get any bit of data about any subject that you want to know about, and then they bring it all back home to you. But these agents live like entities right within the network. And they're capable of talking to computers and getting past passwords and things. It's not an individual doing this. This is a software agent that does it. This information is retrieved and it's stored in huge, massive things. Databases, your legal history, your medical history, your purchasing history, your insurance history, your driving records, where you have traveled and where you have stopped. And then you have programs that are called data mining programs. And they analyze it. And they can tell you what you're apt to purchase, why you're likely to purchase it, and sometimes even where you are going to purchase. You're in the phone book, and that's a database. All of the new cars are coming out now with global positioning systems. Everybody who has a cell phone is going to have to be available for 9/11, so that means you can be located no matter where you are. You fill out a warranty card if you buy a piece of equipment of some kind. All of that is available. Now it can be used for 9/11 emergencies, or it can be used for locating terrorists, but it can also be used for perpetrating terror. Information is information. Last summer, I had a conversation with an attorney in Chicago that specializes in identity thefts. And I've been paranoid ever since then. Innocent people don't know, not knowing what's going on. They lose their house, everything, and they find themselves in huge debts. They're cleaned out by people who steal their identity. But that's only small potatoes. There are many more horrendous things that can be done. Now, in saying all of these things, the purpose is not to scare you, but to provoke thought. Because what we're talking about is just the beginning. We're only talking about technological acquisition and analysis of data. Human potential is much greater than that. If we think about it, probably within the next several hundred years, any thought that you think in the physical etheric body will be accessible to anyone who has etheric vision. And in the next several hundred years, that will include the majority of people. To a large extent, right then and there, privacy just went out the window. Now, it might be possible to escape and not do your thinking in the physical etheric body and go into the desire world and function from there until people start picking up your desires, and then you can go into the world of thought. But eventually you can only go so far. Rudolf Steiner says that by the time you get to the level of life spirit, there are no secrets to anyone. And of course, everything there is all love. So in short, before too long, we're not going to have any secrets. Anyone with the capacity to do so will be able to get any information. Yes, along the way, they certainly will be eventually, yes. But everything that we learned using them now will be able to apply to direct vision. Character growth is slow. Attaining psychic abilities can be very fast. Thus, there are going to be a lot of people like Regan and Goneril that have that psychic ability, but not the character to use it well, to pick out exactly where somebody is weak and exactly what somebody is desiring. This whole series of plays that we're looking at, this is the third of 4, is a sub-series on love and the law. And it covers a lot about good and evil and right and wrong. The intent is not in these talks to be a petty moralist. This is very important stuff. A good deal of our success in our spiritual lives and our ability to move forward into the future rides on this. The chief impediments to spiritual development and unfoldment of powers or faculties or whatever is moral and ethical. And I don't mean to say that we're a bunch of sleazebags or criminals or unwholesome or anything like that, because for the most part I think we're decent people. But we're not exceptionally moral and ethical, and that's what's necessary. We still get angry. If we had spiritual powers, we could kill in one moment of anger. We don't always give love to people who are unpleasant, even though they may desperately need our love. It's of the highest significance when we look at the great spiritual teachers. All of them put their greatest emphasis on love and principles of ethics and of morality. So we can see that the problem is easy to see, but it's not so easy to solve in life. It's not always easy to love. So in the future, there will be virtually no secrets. Thus, it's just like the conspiracy, which really isn't a conspiracy, it's more like a cabal in this play. There's going to be all kinds of people that are going to be like Regan and Goneril and Edmund and Cornwall. They're going to be right in the open about their evil and malice because it takes too much effort to hide it. There's no reason to hide it. The problem is complicated by the fact that in the future we will not be able to defend ourselves. Because when we become so good that we are trustable, or that the spirit inside of us will allow the personality to unfold powers, that we won't use any of those powers for harm. Not even to defend ourselves, not even to incapacitate an evildoer. Because if we retaliated, we would be open to even greater things in ourselves. And if we retaliated and gave out violence, we'd be starting down that same path ourselves. So the Manichaeans, who are an extremely high spiritual order, Manecheans. Yeah, that's right. The book is the Book of Manes, or the Book of Manes. I don't know how to pronounce it. So, they are a group of highly developed spiritual people who have spent all of their time trying to find ways and teach them to people to endure suffering and evil from without, and to be able to not retaliate. What they do teach is something like a spiritual Aikido or a spiritual Kung Fu, where evil is converted back into the love that it deviated from in the first place, and it's sent back as love with loving intent. And so we can see that this whole movement, or this whole way of looking at things, has its roots in the teachings of Christ Jesus, where we're told to turn the other cheek, and to walk an extra mile, and to love our enemies. Now, all of this sounds good, but it isn't really good yet. As I said, we all get vexed and angry with friends who mean us well. We even get upset when the just consequences of our past ills come back to us, and because we don't remember the past ills, we get upset and we think that the cosmos is picking on us. If we were really in the teaching of Christ, Christ teaches us that it is the highest blessing to receive undeserved malice and to take it so that we can return love for hate. I suppose that's really steep. It's tough enough to take what we have coming to us, but what we don't have coming to us, to take that on intentionally just so that we can turn it around, is a really big thing. For somebody like me, I'm a Virgo rising, and that describes what an acrimonious wimp that I am. I complain about this and everything else. What? That's right. That's exactly what the next line says. We need to encourage each other. And we need to pray for each other. And we need to be unified with each other in that way. Now, I don't know how much of this Shakespeare knew or how much he intended. But whatever the case is, this drama is excellently suited for demonstrating the work of our evolutionary future with open evil. The openly evil villains in this play are not redeemed. They don't grow at all. Edmund, at his very death, does try to do a little bit of good, but there's no sign that he's really grown. But it's only a play. And you can't expect miracles, and you can't expect something idealistic in a play if especially it's supposed to be reasonable. So the play is still at a level where we're at now, where the servants have to kill Cornwall, or Edgar has to kill Edmund, and so it's not some future kind of consciousness. Even in the real evolution in front of us, it's not clear how many of the real evildoers can be redeemed, even by the skills of the Manichaeans, by giving them as much love as possible. So we have to be also careful of simple-minded confidence and over-optimism, because they in themselves can be liabilities. When it comes down to it, probably all we can do is love. So let's turn to Edgar and the other people who grow in the play and briefly review some of the things in their psychology and how it relates to moral or ethical growth. Yeah. Now, we've already, she's a little feisty tonight. She knows she's not on mic and she thinks she can get away with everything. It's in the ethers though, Roz. It's in the ethers. We've already discussed that philosophy of showing your faults and hiding your good things. But there are other things about the tender-minded to look at. Disguise is a natural state for an introvert. The introvert believes that the only reality that is true is the inner reality. An introvert will feel that outer appearances have something false about them, something untrue. A real introvert doesn't even have to intentionally disguise, because the real introvert feels that the personality is a disguise to the real being. That tendency of introversion can take different forms. A common form of it is to disregard outer appearances and buy all of your clothes at Farm and Fleet. Some very extreme forms of introversion become perverted, so that they think that the outer world or the outer casing is not only untrue, but that it should be punished for its untruth. And in these extreme forms of introversions, there are things like beatings. Some of them are self-administered. Flagellations, things like that. It's a kind of a masochism. There's even a danger in the introversion of feeling superior because of all of the havoc that is wreaked on the outer personality. This brings us to another facet of the meek-minded in this drama. All of the meek-minded in this play, who happen to be the good guys, get hammered. And they get hammered pretty hard. And often it seems in a blameless way. Like things are coming back to them and they don't know that they're coming back. It just feels like things are happening. There's quite a bit of brutal treatment. There's damage, there's carnage, and the tragic heroes get the lion's share of it. Now, this fact can be interpreted several ways. And those various interpretations, we'll only mention one or two, are not mutually exclusive. And they may not all be true or untrue. Now, some folks would say, they would argue that these things happen to the good guys or to the tender-minded because of their psychological stance. They leave themselves open to it and perhaps even invite it. There's probably some truth in that. We all know people that are always having something happen to them, and it's quite often that it's because of the way they regard themselves that those things are always happening to them. In some cases, it's obviously invited. In some cases, it's not so obvious. If we're afraid of a dog, the dog is more likely to attack us. And if we're not self-respecting, others are more likely to pick on us. Now, this view of the universe is different than most people concede. It's a kind of a psychodeterminism. A psychodeterminism wherein one unconsciously and with uncanny sensitivity senses the circumstances of the world and puts oneself into them with that kind of posture. The standard view of the world is much more materialistic. It sees a mechanical universe set in motion by random causes. Once it's started randomly, laws carry things out rigorously to the last detail. This is also not the view of humans that are waking, conscious, intelligent beings that feel they are above nature. Once one admits to the possibility of a consciousness beyond waking consciousness, it's a much different universe. Mystics would say such a universe is a live universe. It is, we interact with it. It's an interactive universe. We participate in that universe on various levels. And we have various ends and purposes. And a good deal of it we're not conscious of. That's what the whole mystical quest is to become conscious of all of them. To participate fully in the creative activity. Most of the suffering and sorrow in this play comes at the hands of the tough-minded humans who plot and scheme and intentionally mean malice. However, not all of it comes that way. There is the storm, for example, and that comes from nature. There's no Prospero in this play to summon up the storm. Now, it's true that Lear could have gotten out of the storm, but he's really introverted in this sense. He needs the external world to distract him because the internal world is way more than he can handle. Then there is the fact that the tragic heroes grow. They're not just playing out some subconscious desire for punishment. Other people suffer, but they don't grow. The two older sisters suffer, but they don't grow. In fact, the others seem almost to devolve into something dismal and futile. Now, before we continue on too far on this line, we have to clarify a few things. Again, we're not intending to say that only meek-minded or introverts grow. Everyone grows, just in different ways. What we're trying to do is we're trying to see while so much suffering and concurrent growth is there in these meek-minded people. In this, we're not trying to describe a subjective or a personal universe. The universe may be interactive, and we can bring things down on ourselves, but we're still small agents in the whole process. And above all, we have to agree with Scripture when it says God is not a respecter of persons. The universal spirit is not cold or distant. It's not impersonal. It's not like stepping on ants on the sidewalk or something like that. When or as we are in the Spirit, we're intimately involved with the greater cosmos. And while there's love and compassion in that process, it's not subjective, it's not personal. However, when we view everything from the extreme limits of our material personality, which we do most of the time, because we're looking with senses that are by themselves subjective, our whole view of the cosmos becomes subjective. To some extent, we need to get out of our bodies in a sense of consciousness, not just stepping out of our bodies so we don't have to experience the pain in them, but we have to be able to get out of our bodies and the subjectivity inherent in them. Moreover, since we do have selfishness and we are weak and defensive, we take things personally, even though they're not intended that way. The growing characters in this play get beyond personal suffering, especially Lear. He no longer takes things as personal. First it was just his daughters against him, and it was all very personal. There's a broader interpretation and explanation for the abundance of sorrow of some of these tragic heroes that grow. And it goes beyond the unconscious psychodeterminism. It has to be that way because the spirit is beyond the subconscious elements. The spirit is the source of progress. It is the spirit that shames us in our petty egoism by exposing our guilty desires so that we can progress. If we look at things like symptomatic actions or called Freudian slips or things like that, they always occur about matters in which we are conflicted. There is a conflict between the conscious outer intent, which seems to be wanting one thing, and some inner desire which wants another thing. It isn't that our unconscious desires are real or our own only desires, but it's that they're there, and that contradiction needs to be cleared up. It is the Spirit that helps us to realize that we lie to ourselves in saying that we don't have these things in us, or that we have overcome them all. We can't resolve them until we know they're there. And so if there are subconscious activities like Freudian slips, it is the Spirit that brings them out into the surface so that we can see them. And that spiritual consciousness is not the way we address ourselves when we're thinking in our conscious mind, nor is it necessarily like the subconscious scheming and working from behind things. It's more like the consciousness that watches a dream and watches everything while not actually participating in it. Its participation is a much more indirect or a much more greater kind of participation. The thing that is common in all of the growing tragic heroes is faith. If we go through the lines, we find that each of them voices a belief in a greater process of which they are part. None of them seem to know with any degree of exactitude like that of psychodeterminism, but each senses something greater is going on. It's something that they can come to know, provided they don't resist it. And this is one of the big things that the tender-minded people learn, that there are some things that cannot be resisted. Lear gets far enough along in his growth of understanding that he realizes that one can be free in the spirit while living within the limitations of destiny, within a walnut shell, something like that. So their tender-mindedness is not mere submissiveness, and it's not self-punishing masochism, but it is an acceptance, or it is a receptivity to a much greater creative determining process, something that's beyond the petty things, even though it works through them. This acceptance, while it doesn't have knowledge like the knowledge we have in the material world, it's certainly not blind. It's shown by the fact that all of the people who believe in astrology, working through the things of life that they're experiencing, are the people who are the tender-minded people. They're the people that are open and receptive, and that openness and receptivity allows them to see something greater of which they are part without having to defend themselves in a tough-minded personal stance. As the play goes on, all of the characters, especially the mild-minded or the tender-minded, allude more to mythology, and to mythology of tragic growth. So we see in this a refocus from the subjective, personal, to something of cosmic proportion, a different kind of a perspective. It doesn't get so far that they can function as free agents in the spirit, but it does get far enough along so that they don't have to try to arrogate control of their life to the lower petty personal side of things. We'll come back to this tender-minded and tough-minded thing a little later on when we get to the major theme. But now it's time to very quickly, as the notes go on, they get more and more sparse. From here on in, it's a race to the end. This play is a variation of a common theme in a lot of folklore and even in quite a bit of mythology. There are many variants, but this is one. It's especially so in folk tales where there are always 3 sons or 3 daughters. And there is usually a difficult task with a great reward for its successful completion. Great hope is always placed in the elder children, but they always fail. Not much stock is ever placed into the 3rd child, who seems deficient in some way. And sometimes the 3rd child is even a stepchild. But the 3rd always succeeds, always starts something new. Again, this is one of those cases where I don't know whether Shakespeare was intending to use this mythological formula or not. In any case, it works for us in our trying to get spiritual understanding and to be able to get tips and insights for our spiritual development. So let's start with something that is somewhat far-fetched on this mythical character of the play. Yes? Yep. in fact, a little of that we're going to talk about. Quite often in these talks we talk about the threefold spirit in the macrocosm and in the microcosm. When we talk about the threefold spirit, we're talking about it by reflection, because direct communication from the higher attributes of the threefold spirit is not possible for us right now. When we've talked about the threefold spirit, we've said that the first attribute, which is called in Christian mysticism the divine spirit, and it is the highest that we can reach in manifest spirit, we as human beings. The divine spirit is usually the deepest and highest state, because there is another unmanifest state behind it. Usually that unmanifest state of spirit that is beyond the divine spirit is identified with the divine spirit, because the divine spirit is what is between us and it. That higher state is vaguely referred to in mythology and even in spiritual literature. When that higher state of being beyond the Trinity is spoken of, it's usually spoken of in one of two ways. Because in eternity it has never been involved directly in manifest creation, and because it has never overtly from itself unfolded any potential, and because it is not directly participating in the workings of this creation, it is sometimes called virgin spirit. In this reference, it is usually feminine, and it is virginally creative. That's a big topic. We're not going to go into it now. And that virgin spirit, beyond being feminine and virginally creative, is also very young. The other reference is to the method of participation in creation. A participation that is not direct, but is actually voyeuristic. In this reference, that which is beyond the divine spirit is seen as very, very old. Old or older than the creation. In this sense, it is usually seen as masculine, and is referred to as something like an ancient of days, and usually as a silent watcher, which sees things into existence and sees the experience out of those existential happenings. So it, whether we look at it as a virgin spirit or as an ancient of days, is an ever invisible center behind our threefold spirit. Now, the threefold spirit itself has been seen in various times and in various cultures. For example, in India, it has been seen as three male gods, Brahm, Vishnu, and Shiv. These three gods are married to goddesses who are also their sisters, and their counterparts. They're called Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Parvati. Now, there are very interesting notions in these mythical concepts from ancient times. For example, the males held the title and the power and the command. They did some deeds, especially head bashing and carrying out of things that had to be done. But the work was actually done by the female gods. They were the active agencies. The counterparts carried out what was commanded by the masculine divinities. Now, this is very different from Western folk tales and mythology, where different needs are being met, so the myths are different. In the West, usually the ancient West, there are indeed numerous trinities of female goddesses. And usually those female goddesses are hags. They're old hags because they antedate our present human state of existence. They go way back in cosmogony. In the Western mythology, feminine qualities represent receptive, responsive, and even passive states. They represent states of being different from masculine characteristics, which are more directive, more initiating, and more active. So when a myth or a fairy tale speaks about three old hags, it's speaking of the ancient threefold spirit not yet brought into complete waking assertive activity. It's going to be millions of years before it is. We're starting on it now. So in our story of King Lear, there are three women that are young. But the nature of the play has to have it be that way. You know, King Lear can't have three old hags as daughters to carry out the myth. So what we have is an ancient, abstract, cosmic, mythological formula. And what we've done is, very briefly, we have looked at the characters in the story in an abstract sense. Now all that's left is to abstractly live out the action of the story in a way that relates to practical things in spiritual seeking. Of course, when we abstract, we lose all of the practical wisdom and the psychology that Shakespeare has to offer. But we've already looked at a bit of that in the commentary, so we're not at a loss there. Let's begin with the concept of retirement and inheritance, which play a large role in this play. In spiritual cosmology, retirement means more activity than less. Spiritual things are eminently practical. In the process of doing something, putting ourselves into something, one develops soul power. One awakens potentials, talents, and learns something. In the very sensitive spiritual universe, there is no such thing as a Peter principle. Do all of you know what a Peter principle is? Peter principle is an idea that in any kind of organization, like if you work for the state or if you work for an insurance company, you keep rising through the ranks until you rise to the rank at which you are, what's the word that they use? Incompetent. Yes, an incompetence principle. The spiritual universe isn't like that. Everyone is given a chance to create, but it's impossible to be artificially advanced or to be promoted to incompetence. We sometimes have to struggle with new roles when we raise to a higher level, but it's impossible to be artificially raised. One cannot be initiated if one does not have soul power. Reality is what the Buddhists would call meritocracy. You get what you merit. And when you do things of the Spirit, you develop merit. Every being in the cosmos is used to its capacity in the true spiritual economy. So, when an individual being unfolds a given evolutionary activity, there is an urge to rise to new capacities. We all want to get better. We want to be more far-reaching in what we do. The living spiritual cosmos is sensitive, as we've just said, and it supports and it encourages this because it increases the greater good. It works with the eternal purpose of everything that's going on. So if a person digs ditches in service, one is serving. And along the way, you probably unfold other capacities and capabilities while you're digging ditches. One of the things you learn just from experience are things that you can teach to other ditch diggers. But if we remain a ditch digger, we become a foolish ditch digger. It's a simplistic example, but we do learn and we do develop in the very simple things of our life. And we do want to progress in the spiritual life. The ascending in progress to a new level is called retirement. You're retired from the busy work. When we retire, we pass on to other beings from our experience and from our new access to a higher spiritual realm. What we pass on from that is our spiritual legacy. We don't retire without leaving a legacy behind. So taking what we've said so far in abstract, this can be seen as an allegory of a virgin threefold spirit rising out of passivity into direct active spiritual activity. The inheritance passes down from the virgin spirit through the divine spirit and through all the other realms that we're in right through our material being. The divine spirit is the first created spiritual manifestation. It is the firstborn, so to speak. This is spiritual primogeniture. Primogeniture doesn't always work in the material world, but spiritual primogeniture never fails. It's impossible. Does everybody know what primogeniture is? It's the idea that the firstborn is the best. Sometimes it works out, but usually it doesn't. There's some truth to it. If you have many children, the ones that are born when the mother is older and has been subject to more forces are more likely to be Down's babies or something like that. But the firstborn isn't always the brightest. From our vantage here, deep in the material realms, looking up into the spiritual realms, the divine spirit is the font from which everything that flows into the universe comes. It's the elder brother or the elder sister that represents. It is not itself, but it represents the Ancient of Days. As this spiritual inheritance is distributed, some things are possible and some things are impossible. In the fairy tale, the two older sisters or the two older brothers always fail. In the allegory, in the way we're looking at it, which is not the only way it can be looked at, but in our allegory, the way we're looking at it, they must fail. Now, to us it seems utterly incredible that the divine spirit and the life spirit could fail in anything, because they're spiritually perfect. Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. But they are also realms or states of being that are pure spirit. They are pure of anything concrete or of any kind of limitation as we know it. They're void of all of those things. All of the concrete or the semi-concrete realms issue from them, or better, are precipitated in them, but there is nothing really concrete in their being. Thus, they cannot, in the active sense of the word, do anything concrete. It's impossible for them to directly do anything concrete. There is one special thing in particular that the third sister, and only the third sister, can do. And that is to conceive and to objectify. The third sister is always a little peculiar and even suspect in the eyes of its elders. This is because in our cosmos, as it is now, the region of ideational thought, which abuts the region of concrete thought, and all of the concrete worlds, that region is an ideating idea. It is a spiritual realm where there are universal ideas. But it is not purely spiritual, because each of those ideas, each of those principles, each of those concepts has internal limits. Some of these ideas are more important than others. The idea of a being is of central importance. Not just being, or spiritual being, but a being. This idea can be the idea of a self. It can be an idea of God. Or it can be the idea of self as God. Thus, to even know self in limited reflection is extremely important to the universal spirit. Because that's the only way it can get objective waking consciousness. Selfness known as its selfness through a self, because it's been concretized. It is especially important if it is reflected off of the surface of the concrete mind, which can be seen as the antithesis in non-being. It's a very touchy issue. I don't want to go any further than that. Thus, only the third child can give the Ancient of Days what it needs. How ideas are conceived and completed is important to this process, and uncannily important to this rendition of the story. The third spirit is called the human spirit. And humans are rational beings. The third spirit is the thinker. In its spiritual nature, which is to us a chaos of ideas, it's symbolized by Neptune. In its nature as self, and self as God, it is symbolized by the sun. In its nature as idea or ideator, it is symbolized by Jupiter. Jupiter is the idea that ideates. So it is the very nature of ideas. We can't go very far into this, But one good example that is Jupiterian about ideas is the fact that they are born whole. Jupiter loves wholes, the general, the universal, the abstract wholes. When ideating, one has the whole idea in mind, and lesser ideas are discovered or conceived within it. For example, if someone conceives the idea of aqueous transport, a boat, all sorts of ideas are born in it or with it. Buoyancy, displacement, viscosity, streamlining, all those things are born right within the concept of the boat. Now, there are all sorts of ideas about boats. All you have to do is go down to a harbor, or boats that are very differently shaped from others. But they all use some kind of universal idea. When an idea is complete, when it has that sense of wholeness, it can be projected into the world of concrete thought. And it can become materially manifest. Or it can be reflected into pure spirit. Most likely, both things happen. Now, the completion of an idea is important to ideation because it is in that finalness, that fullness or the wholeness that, it's completed. It has a feeling about it. All spiritual things have feelings, which are not mere emotions. But it's a feeling like it's done. It's a feeling of discovery. Wow, I did it. Something that kind of nature. The word that we have for the happiness or the joy in it's finished. Because Jupiter is a planet of happiness. When it has finished something and when it has the whole, there is happiness there. It is very much like the Elohim that look back on their creations and say, it is good. The idea, or the feeling that completes an idea, is gratitude. Pentecostals, who frequently have experiences in the human spirit or the Holy Ghost, they're not really great experiences, but they are experiences in that realm. You know what happens to them? They reach that realm most often when they say the following words. Praise the Lord. And it's in that kind of happiness and in that kind of positivity that it happens. So the fixation in frustration, in Lear, as the Ancient of Days, is based on profound spiritual principle. And when Cordelia demonstrates true gratitude and goes out on the battlefield and exposes herself to danger out of gratitude, both of them are freed. And both of them can ascend and they can retire. All right. The theme for this series of 4 plays is love and the law. It's now time for the theme talk. We're almost done. No, more like 25. To get into the talk for the theme in the last several plays, such as Romeo and Juliet and Measure for Measure, we've been using quotes or circumstances from the play as a segue to get into the theme or idea. And that's been so pleasant that I decided to continue that with this play. Each of these plays that we have studied so far has a flavor all of its own. It is almost as if each of the plays was written in a different key signature. Now, Sometimes we're so caught up in the action, or we're so enchanted by the poetry that we tend to, sometimes we're just trying to understand what the words say, and we miss the prevailing atmosphere. King Lear has a prevailing atmosphere to it. And let's just look at 3 quotes that get us to that atmosphere and what we're trying to get at. First one is from Act 4, Scene 3, line 47. Lear is talking to Cordelia. You do me wrong to take me o' the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound upon a wheel of fire, that mine own tears do scald like molten lead. When we came across that, we said that was Ixon's wheel, and that goes right back to the initiation ceremonies in Egypt and other places. In Act 5, Scene 2, line 2, Edgar is talking to his father during the war. What? In ill thoughts again? Men must endure their going hence, even as their coming hither. Ripeness is all. Come on. In Act 5, Scene 3, Edmund is speaking to Edgar as he dies, and Edgar has revealed who he is. And he's told Edmund who he is, too, at the same time. And Edmund says, Thou hast spoken right. 'Tis true, the wheel is come full circle. I am here. Second thing that we've been doing in these theme talks is we've been asking fundamental questions about the nature of cause and consequence. The questions that we have been asking are so fundamental that they approach absurdity. I can even make absurd things serious. But they've been very fruitful and very practical. Some of the questions we've asked is, how do we know that there's a connection between cause and consequence? Or, what is implied by cause and consequence being connected? Or, if cause and consequence are connected, when does a cause become a consequence? If causes become consequences, what's the difference between a cause and a consequence? Or the last question that we asked in the previous talks was, what is implied by the difference between a cause and a consequence? This time, we'll continue that practice, but we'll ask only one basic question. Where does a cause become a consequence? When we ask the question of when does a cause become a consequence, it was a question of time. Now when we ask where does it become a consequence, it's a question of space. The simple answer to the former question was, a cause becomes a consequence through an event in time. However, time and space are both poles of potential. Both are seed beds for things which could be. Potential is a buffer or a buffer zone between the known and the unknown in the absolute. They are two poles of potential, just like they're precipitates. And the precipitate of time is spirit, and the precipitate of space is matter. Both states of cosmic root substance. As such, whether in potential or in manifest spirit matter, they are interdependent and they are interchangeable. However, if one were to ask the question, where does a cause become an effect, by saying in an event, that would be technically correct. It wouldn't be very satisfying. It doesn't give us what we really want to know. So let's try to get to the point and answer the question another way. The point is common to both time and space. It is basic to both of them. When we say things like, at this point in time, or he went from that point westward, what we do with the point becomes pretty complicated. But basically, there are three kinds of consequences, consciousness, for dealing with time and space. The Orphic mystics, who founded mathematics in the Western world, associated those three states of consciousness in three geometrical categories and three geometric tools. The point itself was associated with momental consciousness in mystical experience. We'll come to that in a little bit. The straight line, associated with rectilinear material consciousness, was associated with a straight edge. The circle, associated with cyclical or circular consciousness, was associated with spirit. And the tool for it, which was a compass, which is actually taking a straight edge and turning it around a point or a fulcrum. Now we're going to be extremely brief about this and touch only a few points because the race is really on now. And if we did, we'd be here for quite a few talks. All of mathematics as we know it right now developed from these three elements: the point, the line, and the circle, the locus, the straight edge, and the compass. The Orphics would say that all of mystical experience can be indicated in mathematics derived from these three elements. There's that much. I'm surprised. I thought we were on the last page. There's the other. No, it's not. In modern times, materialism abounds, and we work primarily with rectilinear ideas of time and space. We even insult people and imply that they've gone crazy by telling them they've gone nonlinear. We've done it quite a bit with rectilinear thought. In some ways, we've conquered the material world, which is just what we're meant to do with linear thought. However, if we consider time as a rectilinear vector into the future, we miss a good deal of reality. Here in the United States, where we are an epitome of rectilinear thought, we have developed a throwaway or a disposable mentality. We feel we can throw away what we don't want and do what we want to because we're on a linear path into the future and we won't be back this way again. There's a good deal of optimism in that view. Some people even think we can pollute the environment because by the time the pollution starts to set in, we'll have developed something new on our linear path and we won't have to deal with that. And in some ways, in terms of new things and unprecedented things, this optimism is true. Nonetheless, it doesn't describe our experience, at least not completely. The fact is that we do come back to things again, or they come back to us. Full circle, as Edmund says. Some people maintain that time is spiral. Not to say what kind of spiral, but that time is spiral. This seems much more satisfactory because it has the repetitive frequencies of cycles and it progresses linearly. Moreover, we see spirals all over in the manifest world, from galaxies to the so-called orbits of so-called subatomic particles. They're all spirals. Now, this would be fine if everything was incorporated in this one material plane. But it isn't. Even though this is an improvement, it's inadequate to describe reality. Ancient people were almost purely circular for two reasons. The material reason was that they were agricultural. They relied on being sensitive to natural cycles. The other reason is that they were more attuned to spirit in some ways than the material world. The circular, the spherical spirit. Fascinated by the perfection of the spirit and of the circle and of the sphere, they felt it was all inclusive. Even went so far as to say that progress was a material illusion, a distraction from the circle or wheel of reality. Even the variations in natural cycles were unessential illusions, accidents, as the Aristotelians would call them. The whole idea was to get off the wheel and get out of it without saying to where. This leaves us in something of a pickle. We don't want to go in circles because we know there's progress. Even in spiritual things, there's progress. We don't want to go off on the tangent of disposability because we know things do come back. Spirals approach being satisfactory for this plane. That's certainly not enough. So what do? We get back to the point. Mystics have always found that the more one can concentrate on the present, the now, the moment, the instant, the more one can penetrate, and the more one can enter into it. One passes through matter and penetrates into inner existence. Concentration becomes simultaneously expansion to wider realms without invalidating anything in the material or the outer realm. These inner realms are not only wider and deeper, they are more primary. Or better, they are more aboriginal. They are in the direction of the source. The deeper one penetrates into the point, into the moment, the more one approaches the source of causes. The word and the concept that we're looking for, the source of causes. From a materialistic viewpoint, we can say that the skillful drawing of a bow across the strings of a violin makes or causes a musical tone. The materialist would say that it's a neural impulse that was initiating the cause, and you couldn't argue with that. It is the material cause in a long sequence of material causes and consequences which are all linked together. They are only superficial causes and consequences. There is another access of causation, another axis of reality, the vertical axis. The vertical axis that penetrates into realms that are more significant and to higher priority causal realms. With sufficient inward observation, one can see an energy impulse that excites the brain impulse in the musician. With even greater discrimination, one can apperceive and discern the desire to make music or to live music into existence. Music is more than material skill. Some musicians have more soul qualities, which are brought through them even into the material realm. In a similar manner, one can experience the thought behind the desire and the thinker behind the thought. There are other and deeper causes and kinds of causes that go beyond the thinker that are even responsible for the causal self, but they're too much for now. The causes make their way from within out. There are horizontal causes and consequences in each of the realms, just as there are in the horizontal networks of causes and consequences in this material world. But they're not germane to the line of thought that we're pursuing now. Causes are precipitated or condensed out of rarer spiritual realms. They are materialized and they are objectified outwardly to the depth of the concentration of the causal agent. Thus, the place where a cause becomes a consequence is without. When a cause has spent itself, it is objectified. It is finalized. It is in its most outward state. This objectification then becomes an effect. The bow across the string is one of a number of final causes. Because matter is condensed in the potential of the unknown called space, the experience of the cause, as far as it has been externalized, is also unknown. However, after it has been objectified as consequence, and the history has been realized in that finalization, it is no longer a subjective, creative impulse. It is factual. As it disintegrates, because there's no longer any spiritual energy to sustain it, some of these sustenances take millions of years, it dissolves. It dissolves from the condensed materiality back into the realms from which it was precipitated. And it dissolves back with the factual history. Thus, the causes are subjective and the consequences are objective history, making their way back to the spiritual source. We look at things in this way. The peculiar feature about it is that the future is without and the past is within. The future is subjective and the past is objective, because the former is projected from the spirit to the object, and the latter from the object to the spirit. There are other ways to look at this, so we don't want to jump to any final conclusions. But in any case, there are vertical cycles, just as there are horizontal cycles like the four seasons. In In fact, the vertical cycles are more inevitable than the horizontal, which can be terminated. They may be swallowed whole into the vertical when they are terminated. Obviously, there are all sorts of interactions between vertical and horizontal cycles. This is a very skinned-down version. Things get pretty complex. There's a very good image that is vaguely apt. Suppose you have a juggler, and the juggler has 5 balls. And 4 of them are kept in a really tight rotation, small orbit, while the 5th is launched way up into the air. When the 5th returns to the plane of the others, it's as if it's from another realm. But it works right into the rotation because consciousness works it in. And that's the way things that come from the deep past or from deep into spirit work into cause and consequence in a really complex way. Most of our destiny is not the kind of destiny where you step on the head of the rake and get bopped in the head. Some of it is, but even if it is, it's because of some more inner cause. Our most consequential destiny is the vertical destiny from within. Even though it may never be completely worked out in its finality. If we think about it, our diseases are consequences of our attitudes from inside of us. They may work out through hereditary predispositions, but we don't get diseases merely because of hereditary conditions. We get them because we have certain attitudes. Medicines can help us with our diseases, provided they don't remove the symptom before the spirit has experienced sufficiently to learn from the lesson. Otherwise, it's just plain meddling. It is the vertical wheel of fire to which Lear is bound. We all are. It's like geology. Mountains are worn down, and they flow to the seas as silt. They're pressed layer on layer on layer, and are pressed deeper into the earth where there is a creative fire which transforms them and thrusts them back out. This is what happens in our spiritual and psychic lives all the time. We have attitudes and experiences which we don't keep in mind. We forget them. Sometimes we want to forget them. However, they return to their source because there's nothing to sustain them. And when they dissolve, it must be to a causal realm from which they came. There they're processed, and in doing so they're metamorphized, just like the silt is metamorphized, beyond recognition. Mystics claim that mica is flower petals that has been turned into stone by heat and pressure. If you ever read on the effects of repression, it's fascinating to see how things get metamorphized when they're pushed way down into the soul. If things are not resolved at the creative source, they're forced back to the surface until they are. And we may not recognize them, but they have their effect. Even then, they may still need to recycle, because the stuff of which our lives is made is much nicer and much more efficient if we can use these things creatively. We have to draw on that inner source, and it doesn't have to be just dross coming back at us again and again. Eventually we learn how to creatively use what we've put down into the cellar, so to speak. When we left the tragic heroes, we noted that they all grew and that they had accepting, open minds. They had gotten to the point where they didn't fight the destiny cycle. When their monsters returned, they didn't project them onto others, which is a futile, pathological externalization, not a responsible creativity. They realized, like Edgar does, ripeness is all. We have obviously opened something here that is huge and complicated beyond our scope in these talks. Perhaps along the way we'll look for little vignettes that will demonstrate the different aspects of this. And books for Merchant of Venice are there. Please take them along and bring the Lear books back. And from now, we'll try to live like Lear, free within the law, and so we can see things in a new, fresh way. Yes. Yes. Correct. No, what they're saying when that statement is made is that don't talk in circles to me and don't get stuck in one point. They're saying the value is linear thought is the only true thought. We say that someone who doesn't work linearly is evil. We call them crooked. In the ancient world, the entrances to Chinese houses was curved because they thought the devil walked a straight line. And it's because some people have evaluated the things as being more valuable if they are curved, and some people have valued them more if they are straight line. And we in our materialistic thought are monomaniacs about linear thinking, and that is a mistake. Yeah. We won't get you started on that.